Hi everyone, welcome back to the audit and attestation class. This is part 4 of journal procedure to obtain sufficient and appropriate evidence. Request you to go through part 1, 2 and 3 because this is in continuation of the same. So in part 4, we'll be covering in detail about stratification of sampling, attribute sampling, setting reliability level to test of control, tolerable rate to evaluate the test of control, and the discovery sampling approach. So let's dive into to understand more in detail about all this testing approach in chapter 4, part 4 as well.
Hi everyone, welcome to chapter 4, class 2. Let me take you to the notes and we can start from there. Right, so this is chapter 4. In last week, we covered sufficient appropriate evidence, like in high level overview about like what is evidence, what is sufficiency, what is appropriateness of the evidence, right? And after that, we started the 4.2 topic, which is journal procedure to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, right? So we discussed in that in detail about journal audit procedure. What were those journal audit procedure? Inquiries, analytical procedure, right? You guys remember those? Inspection, reperformance, recalculation, confirmation, right? Then we jumped into sampling techniques, right? So we did some part of the sampling technique and we'll be finishing off that sampling technique hopefully like today. We'll try to finish off all the sampling technique today. And then tomorrow we'll be starting with the new topic, which is analytical procedure, including data analytics. So these two topics, which is very important, and this data analytics, audit data analytics, this is very new topic for the exam purpose as well. So you can expect like some question from this definitely in your exam, right? So tomorrow we'll be covering analytical procedure and data analytics procedure. And then like external confirmation is a small topic. We'll see like if we get some comfortable time tomorrow, then we'll finish off external confirmation as well. So the target for today and tomorrow class is to finish off these 4 major topics, right? So if I take you through a quick walk, what we have done in last week, sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence, right? That we have discussed in detail. General audit procedure, inquiry, inspection, observation, roll forward procedure, reperformance, recalculation, and confirmation, right? Then some year-end procedure we discussed. After that, we discuss on like additional things required for integrated audit, like test of controls, and then we discuss on test of control procedure, frequency, count of frequency, and what all things we need to do in test of controls as well, right? After that, we discuss for accounting and review services, which follows like SSARs for the non-issuer, compilation engagement and review engagement, what all things need to be done. And then we discuss on issuer, what are the additional procedure required to be done, and attestation engagement. Then we did certain practice question as well, right? After that, in last class, we started with sampling technique. We discussed on about statistical sampling and non-statistical sampling both. We discussed the benefit of statistical sampling. Then we discuss about type of statistical sampling, which include like attribute sampling and variable or quantitative sampling. Attribute sampling is majorly used for the test of control, and variable sampling, or you can say quantitative sampling, is majorly used for the test of control when you need to test the value. When you need to test the controls or when you need to test the attribute, you are using attribute sampling, right? Then we discuss certain example of statistical sampling, which include random number table and probability proportionate to size. I think this is what we covered in our last class. We did this example as well, and PPS sampling. So today we need to start with stratified sampling. So we'll be discussing, you can say, other example of statistical sampling, and then the techniques of statistical sampling we'll be covering today, right? So we'll be starting here from stratified sampling. What is stratified sampling is actually, so stratified sampling is basically segregating or clubbing together respective type of transaction. So which is like same or similar in nature, you can club together and consider that as a one population. So have any of you done the audit of expenditures? Yeah, any one of you have done the audit of expenditures? Yes, no?
Yes,
Any
sir.
idea?
Yes, sir.
Right? So what you do when you plan to test for the expenditure, so you might be clubbing together multiple journal ledgers, right? For the different category of expense, and then out of those total, you might be selecting certain samples, right? That's how you do for testing of expense.
Yes.
And you might be stratifying, you can say clubbing together respective expense based on the respective nature and category of the transaction. For example, you have office lease account separate, then you can say, let's say, what do you call, guest house lease, and then you have maybe like machinery lease, right? So you might have 4 or 5 account in the lease, but the nature of all of them is same as the rental expenditure. So what you can do, you can club together and test as a one population, right? Same way, for example, for marketing expenditure, you might be doing digital marketing, you might be doing print media marketing, you might be doing television marketing, you might be doing radio marketing, or you might have some marketing staff will be doing like other marketing stuff for you. So all those things can be easily clubbed together as a marketing expenditure, right? And to those entire population, you can test together. Make sense? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sanchit, everyone, okay, right? So that is called stratified sampling technique, in which you segregate the population based on the nature of transaction and category of transaction to select the sample from respective category of population. So you club together all kind of rental expenditure, or maybe all kind of internet and telephone expenditure, all kind of marketing expenditure, all kind of journal expenditure, and to those clubbing together, you can consider as a one population, because like expenditure is of similar nature. Make sense? The next, coming to the attribute sampling, which we have discussed earlier as well in statistical sampling, that is mainly used for the test of control. An attribute must be carefully defined. When you are doing attribute testing or attribute sampling, then what is the most important thing is identifying or defining the attribute. What exactly is the attribute and what is the objective you want to achieve out of it, right? An attribute must be carefully defined before an auditor begin attribute sampling execution. For example, like if you are testing purchase to payable process, right? P2P process. In that, we discussed a couple of times earlier as well, like three-way match, which is very important. What is three-way match? Anyone remember what is three-way match?
Sir, agreeing the purchase order with the GRN and invoice.
Yeah. So matching the purchase order with the GRN and invoice, right? So that is an attribute, like three-way match, like account payable team would be doing three-way match before processing any invoice, right? So that is an attribute. That is an attribute, right? Same way, like for example, for any payment, treasury manager would be authorized to approve any payment more than $5,000, right? Or if any payment is required to be processed for more than $20,000, then it required a finance controller approval. So these are actually attributes. What are the controls? Basically, on the respective control activities are generally considered as an attribute. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Any doubt? What is attribute? Basically, what the control you have and who is monitoring and doing that control, who is the control owner, what activity he is doing for those respective controls are generally considered as an attributes, right? Next is setting reliability level. So when you are planning to extract the sample, for testing of control or testing of detail, there are few things which you need to keep in mind as an auditor. Right nowadays, like for all these mathematical calculations, there are standard tools available, even with the top 10 consulting firm as well as to the small CPA firm. So there are many free tool, or maybe like you can say no, at the nominal expenditure. There are so many tools available in the market for doing all this sampling identification. And when you do the sampling identification, I know some of you are working in Big Four, right? You can easily correlate what I'm saying if you have done any time in your life any sampling test. So you might be using random sampling technique, MUS sampling technique, NSS sampling technique, or different, you can say, CPA firm use different terminology, but they have certain templates to it. In those templates, you need to fill certain details, right? And then that template will help you identifying the number of samples or the respective sample, depend on which tool you are using, right? If like some of you who are auditor, you can easily, you can say, recollect from your memory. When you are selecting the sample, there is a template, right? In that template, you will be writing what all details. What is the nature of transaction, right? Value of total value of the population, right? Number of the items in the population, your tolerable limit, right? Your reliability limit, right? So all those information club together and do the some mathematical calculation, and basis that they throw the number of sample, in which you put like your overall materiality, performance materiality, tolerable error, total population, number of population, right? And then what is your control risk, what is like inherent risk, what is the risk of material misstatement. When you put all those information, those tools, statistical tool will give you the number of sample or the list of sample, depend on which category of tool you are using, right? Any of you remember any such tool you might have used in your practical experience? Yeah, Nimisha, Kush.
Yes, sir. I mean, we do use EY random and EY sampling assistant and all those different tools.
Yeah. So what all are the requirements in that tool?
So we have to give like what's the total population, what's the total count, and then we kind of also put in how many samples we are looking at, if in case we already know that. But if we are running random, then we just put in the population size, you put in the type of test and all kind of basic details, and then it will generate a number that, okay, you should be testing these many samples, and then you can just select those samples to further test.
Yeah, cool, thanks. Nimisha, are you here?
Yeah, Kamal, I'm here.
Yeah, so which tool you use in like Deloitte and how it looks like and feel like?
We generally use analytics and monetary unit sampling.
MUS.
Yeah, MUS. So that is more popular, but generally use similar things to what you guys have just said. Population, materiality level is very important. Then what is the risk that has been risk level that has been set for that particular account. Once we put in all of that, it generates a number of samples automatically. Usually key items to pick karta hi karta hai, but uske alawa kuch aur bhi deta hai samples.
Yeah, thanks Nimisha and Kush. This is very helpful. Like why I'm you can say pointing out or bringing you guys here so that you can share your experience, what actually you have seen when you have conducted the audit, because like some of the students here like do not have like audit background or audit experience working on those tools, and also they can also correlate based on your experience, right? So if you remember all those tools which you have used, or to the student like who have not used, but based on like what we have discussed, just keep those things in mind, which generally comes when you are selecting the samples. So nature of your transaction, total population, your materiality, overall materiality, performance materiality, tolerable limit, your control risk, right? Your inherent risk of material misstatement, right? So those things generally, we as an auditor, we need to consider whenever we are identifying the sample size for the respective testing. So same thing is being mentioned in next couple of, you can say, pages over here, but all things you need to keep in mind when you are selecting the sample. First is setting the reliability level between 90 to 95% for test of control. So why 90 to 95? Why not 100? Why not 80? Right? I'm sure this question might comes in your mind, right? Why we are setting the reliability level in between 90 to 95? So reason being, like as an auditor, there might be some detection risk, right? We cannot go up beyond a level to rely on the controls. But if we are not relying on the control, then also we need to balance it out, right? So if we are planning to rely on control, that means the controls would be operating effectively more than 90%, right? But we cannot go beyond 95% because there is always be a detection risk. So that is the reason for keeping the reliability level is generally in between 90 to 95. If you cannot rely more than 90% on the control, the chances are high that you will end up not relying on control. So you are not required to go for a control testing if you are having a doubt for more than 10% that control may not be effective, right? Make sense? The term reliability level and the confidence level are used interchangeably, and reliability refers to the probability of being right in placing reliance on the effective internal accounting control system, right? Second is,
I have a question here. I mean, so for reliability, how does this percentage come into picture? Because either we rely on it or we don't rely on it. So when we don't rely on it, obviously.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's very good point. So either you are relying on it or you are not relying on it. When you are relying on it, when you are more than 90% confident that controls might be operating effectively, then you will be relying on control. If you are not confident more than 90%, then you are generally not rely on control. And if you are planning to rely on control, then you need to give a justification. So that's a probability which you need to keep in mind, because like 100% cannot be perfect anything. Reliability is a risk that auditor will rely on control when in fact the control should not be relied upon. So reliability factor is actually that factor, or maybe the risk that auditor is taking on the controls, and they are accepting the control, they are relying on the control, whereas in fact the controls should not be relied upon. That means, for example, from 1,000 of the population, you have selected 25 sample, right? And those 25 has for any reason come all perfect sample, whereas in rest of the 975 population, let's say 100 items are wrong. That means what sample you have tested has shown a right result and you have placed rely on control. But on the untested population, there are so many mistakes. So this is a risk on the auditor of relying the control low if the sample they have tested are perfectly okay, whereas in actual population, there is some misstatement. Make sense? And below we have certain tables to explain this, but just try to keep these two things separate. For example, if all the samples you have tested are perfectly fine, what as an auditor you will be considering? You will be relying on control, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right? Whereas the actual population, in rest of the population, there are misstatement. That means it is a risk. It is a risk that you are accepting the wrong population and you are relying the controls and you are making the control risk low. Whereas in the actual population, there are certain misstatements. Make sense? That is called detection risk, right? Second is, based on the general practice, minimum reliability level should be 90%. However, at least 95% reliability should be used if attribute is critical. If you are testing the critical items, like where you have fraud risk notice, or maybe significant risk notice, or management overriding of controls, right, or control over significant estimate, in that case of scenario, you are not supposed to rely more than 95%. So there are chances of the risk, there are chances of misstatement. You cannot go more than 95% in those scenario where you have identified as a high risk area, significant risk area, or a fraud risk area, or where you have identified the risk of management overriding of control. In that case of scenario, you cannot put rely more than 95%. Right? Now coming to the tolerable rate. Tolerable rate to evaluate the test of control, which is generally 5 to 10% of your overall materiality, right? Minimum tolerable rate represent a critical value established so that possibility of deviation in excess of that rate would cause the auditor to place less than full reliance. Minimum tolerable rate should not exceed 10% if some reliance is placed on selected internal control, if substantial reliance is placed on internal control, and minimum tolerable rate of 5% or lower is reasonable. What actually it means? Do you remember from the materiality chapter, which we have materiality topic, which we have learned in previous chapter? What is the tolerable error we have considered over there? Do you remember that mathematical calculation we did? Generally, we consider 5 to 10% of the overall materiality as a tolerable error, right? Yeah, some of you are auditor. Does this match to your understanding? What tolerable error you take generally when you do the audit?
Yes, sir.
Right? Okay. Do you guys remember that materiality topic which we have studied in last chapter? Or it's all
Yes, sir.
gone into cold back?
No, sir. We calculate the overall materiality, then we calculate the
Yes.
performance materiality, and then we calculate the tolerable.
Yes. So for calculation of the overall materiality, what all possible bases are there? Profit before
Sir.
tax, right?
Yes, sir.
Or
Earning based,
before income.
activity based, and capital based.
Yes. Activity based, asset based, and earning based, right? So based on respective, you can say limits, we calculate the overall materiality, and then we do certain haircut to reach to the performance materiality. What is the standard haircut?
25% to 50%.
Hmm?
I mean, we take 75 or 50, which is like 25 to 50 haircut.
Yeah, 25 to 50% as the haircut, and the tolerable error is on in a range of 5 to 10% of the overall materiality. That is what is mentioned here. Your minimum tolerable rate represent the critical value established. Why do you calculate tolerable error? Why do you give value to the tolerable error? To identify the misstatement at the account level, to identify the misstatement at the sample level, basically, right? So this represent actually critical value established so that the possibility of the deviation in excess of that would cause the auditor to place less than the full reliance. So now we are discussing about control. Here, if the misstatement is more than the tolerable error or tolerable limit, then it may result into placing less reliance on the control than it is otherwise could have been placed, right? And this should not be more than 10% if some reliance is placed on the selected control, if substantial reliance is placed, right? So next, sampling technique. is discovery sampling. So what all techniques we have discussed so far for the sampling? Statistical sampling and non-statistical sampling. Within the statistical sampling, we are discussing attribute sampling, variable sampling, and then random sampling, probability, one second, yeah, probability proportionate to size, second, and then third, we were discussing stratified sampling. I can put the pointers over here. Third is the stratified sampling. Right. And then fourth is discovery sampling. Have you heard about this term before, discovery sampling? Anyone have any idea, or anyone even heard this term before, discovery sampling? Don't worry, I'll not ask much questions.
No, I was gonna say I have heard about it, but never used it honestly, because we do have that, in one of the drop downs with the tools that we have. So I know that there is discovery sampling, but what exactly that is, I do not.
Yeah, Jaspreet, Nimisha, Sanchit, do you guys have any idea?
I haven't used this before ever.
Sorry?
I haven't used this ever.
I know it's least used, but now yeah, Jesse.
I was saying same here. I mean,
Okay, ditto, huh? Okay, I know, like in traditional audit, we are not using much discovery sampling, but now coming data analytics into picture, so we are using it more. The objective of discovery sampling is to decide whether to accept or reject an audit population. Because like when you do like data analytics, you have like entire population in front of you, right? And you can do the overall assessment of the respective population. And in that, you can assess the population whether it's right or it is not right, right? For which acceptance is appropriate only if the occurrence rate of serious error is very low. That means when you are, you can say, downloading, when you are downloading the data and doing all the cleaning up activity, and after that you put those data into the tool. So you do the reconciliation of the items in the tool and the value coming in the respective journal ledgers. If those tie, then you will be accepting it. If those don't tie, then you might be rejecting it, right? So discovery sample is something like this, whether you are accepting the entire population or you might be rejecting the entire population for a certain reason. The following two conditions must exist before using the discovery sampling. First one is auditor best judgment of the population occurrence rate is 0 or near to 0. That means auditor assume that population occurrence, that means the things may go right. That probability is, things may go wrong. The probability of that is 0 or near to 0. In discovery sampling application, the auditor is usually looking for very critical characteristics. It may be like the litigations, claims, and assessment, right? In which you'll be critically evaluating the characteristics, which if discovered might be indicative of more widespread fraud or serious error in the financial statement. So discovery sampling is being majorly used for the very critical area in the financial statement, like for example, going concern assumption when you are testing. So in that, you'll be evaluating whether the company have appropriate or sufficient funds to survive in next 12 months or not, right? Litigation, claim, and assessment. So maybe if there is any major litigation which may result into the impact on the overall financial statement of the company, right? Or third could be like management overriding of control. So generally discovery sampling is being used in those areas where you can say the risk is more widespread or more serious, or the error may impact the overall financial statement, right? So same way like we were discussing earlier about data analytics stuff, right? So you have taken a complete dump of the journal entries. You have done, like your team has done all the cleaning up activity, and then they have uploaded in the data analytics tool. So what you will be doing after that, you'll be reconciling. If it is not reconciling with the financial statement or with the journal ledgers, then you would be rejecting it, because doing the analysis on inaccurate data will not give you the accurate results. Right? Make sense? And when you are using the discovery sampling, you need to define the following. First one is characteristics to be evaluated, what exactly you want to evaluate. Reliability, your desired 90 to 95%, but not more than 95%, because this is for the critical audit area matters generally, right? Maximum tolerable occurrence rate should not be below 5%. So it should be in a range of 5 to 10%. And definition and sample size of the population. So these all things you need to define in the respective tool when you are planning to use the discovery sampling. Right now, coming to in all this sampling technique, what is the most critical thing is detection risk.
इससे जो पहले वाला पेज था उस पे there is a line that says auditor's best judgment of the population occurrence rate is 0% or near 0%. What does that mean?
So here it's saying auditor best judgment of the population occurrence rate. That means the things may go wrong, or things may not be as per the management as per the auditor expectation. The probability of that is less than 0 or near to 0%.
Are we saying that we're expecting this to be like no error at all?
Yeah, or close to no error. Yeah.
But then that is not possible. That is not possible even in JET, no? Matlab, going by what you have said, normally we use this in JET. So JET may be 100% possible.
What is JET? What is JET?
Journal entry testing. उसमें भी 100% comfort तो आता नहीं कि मतलब
No, I was giving you an example that the total journal entries which you have taken a dump and which you are planning to use for data analytics purpose. So the total population in your data analytics tool should be tied to the journal ledger and financial statement. So there should not be any gap.
So basically this is more from a completeness perspective कि उस completeness में 0% error आना चाहिए.
Yes, majorly.
Okay, thank you.
And in all this sampling technique, what major thing we have noticed is a detection risk, right? Detection risk, which is generally an auditor risk, right? So what is detection risk? That means your audit is based on sample, and the population other than the sample may have certain risk. That risk is called detection risk. Detection risk is basically the risk of not detecting any error because of the inherent limitation of the audit, which is based on the sample testing, right? That is detection risk. Audit risk is inherent risk multiplied by control risk, which is risk of material misstatement multiplied by detection risk. So that is the complete overall audit risk. What is inherent risk? Hope you guys remember. Any idea what is inherent risk?
So risk which is inherent to the business.
They are in the characteristics of that particular business.
The nature of the business.
Nature of business and nature of transaction, right?
What
is control risk? What is control risk?
Sir, the management control would not be able to detect or prevent the material misstatement in a timely manner.
Yeah, prevent, detect, and correct the material misstatement in timely manner, right? And detection risk is basically those risks that our auditor
will not be able to.
Yeah,
that auditor will not be able to. Like when we are doing the audit, we might miss a transaction or anything. Then we detect the risk for that. That is.
Yeah, we are not able to detect that risk, right? So this detection risk can be further bifurcated into two things. One is sampling risk and second is non-sampling risk, right? First, look at non-sampling risk. That is easy. And then we jump into the sampling risk. What is non-sampling risk? Non-sampling risks include all aspects of audit risk that are not due to sampling. So that means the item which has not selected in your sample, any risk in those items or those transactions comes under the non-sampling risk, right? For example, failure to properly define the population. Let's say if you have not properly defined the population, let's say for example, you are testing the marketing expenditure, right? Where you have marketing expenditure, you have digital marketing, you have paid campaign, you have brochures, booklets, flyers, standees, you have marketing team, right? And then you have certain gift items. So which you have not defined, those gift items you have not defined in the marketing expenditure. Whereas you define those as an gift expense, right? So in that case of scenario, your population is not right. So that comes under the non-sampling risk. You have not considered the entire population for the testing. Make sense?
So we can say completeness and accuracy of the population, right?
Yeah, yes, absolutely true. So failure to properly define the population will come under the non-sampling risk. Second is failure to clearly define the nature of audit exception. So what will be an exception? So generally we consider any item of the difference above the tolerable error is an exception in the respective sample, right? That's how you do audit. If the difference between the actual amount and the amount in the system is more than tolerable error, then that is being considered as an exception, right? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right? So if you have not properly defined the exception, then it is a non-sampling risk. Third is failure to recognize the error. That means you have identified any error, but you have not recognized it, maybe on account of negligence or maybe on account of lack of time, right? So there might be possible like you are under pressure to finish off your audit. You have noticed certain error and you thought like you could compile all those things later on, but your manager or your partners has come and sit on your head for the review, and now you miss that, right? So those things is also come under the non-sampling risk. Last one
So,
is,
sir, for the third one, so this is recognized error in the sample which has been selected or not. So basically, if we have selected 25 samples out of a population of 250 or 300, that failure to recognize that error is from the missed out population for which we have not selected sample, or from 25 samples?
Total population.
From total population.
From total population, yeah.
Okay.
Right. Last one is failure to evaluate findings in sample properly. So, for example, you have been asked to test the purchases, right? In the purchases, you have tested the invoice and you have tested the payment, but you have not tested whether the shipment has received or not, right? So that is also kind of non-sampling risk because you're not testing the required item. What is sampling risk? So far we have discussed all those non-sampling risks. What is sampling risk? Sampling risk arise from the possibility that when test of control or test of detail is restricted to samples. That means you are testing only the sample, and based on the sample you have tested, you are concluding whether the controls are operating effectively or not, whether there is misstatement in the entire population or not. Right? What is the objective of test of control? Help you justifying or giving opinion on the operating effectiveness of control, right? What is the objective of substantive testing or test of detail? It will give you the comfort over the value in the respective account balance and transaction, right? So when sampling risk arise from the possibility that the test of control or test of detail is restricted to sample. That means you are concluding on the operating effectiveness of control or on the value of the population based on the sample which you have tested. The audited conclusion may be different if tests were applied in same way to all items. That means the risk is that if you applied the same sampling methodology or what all things you have tested in the respective sample to all population, then your result would be different. That means what you are testing in sample, there might be two things. There might be two possible things. One, for example, you are testing purchases, right? And you have choose to test, let's say, 25 samples from the entire purchases, which is like total transaction are 1000, out of which you have selected 25 as a sample, right? So there might be possibility those 25 is right, but rest of the 975 there might be some problem. Or it can be vice versa as well. Those 25, in that there might be 5 misstatement, but in rest of the 975 everything is perfectly fine, right? There might be possibility, yes or no? There might be a possibility that the sample you have selected is absolutely right, whereas in population there are some misstatement. Or vice versa, the sample you have selected may have misstatement, whereas the balanced population do not have misstatement, right? That could also be possible.
Yes, sir.
Right? So sampling risk inversely in relation to the sample size. If sample size is high, sampling risk is low, or vice versa. Now look at two types of sampling risk. The first one is risk of incorrect acceptance. Risk of incorrect acceptance. When there is no problem in your sample, when there is no misstatement in your sample, that gives you the comfort over the entire population, and you will accept the entire population considering there is no issue in that. Whereas actually there might be some issue on the rest of the population which has not been selected as a sample. That is called a risk of incorrect acceptance or beta risk. Make sense? Why this is called incorrect acceptance, a risk of incorrect acceptance?
Because you are accepted on the basis of the samples, but
yes,
there have been untested sample where there's a problem.
absolutely true. So risk of incorrect acceptance, that is a beta risk, is the chance that the sample verified is correct, but untested population have misstatement. So this impact the risk of assessing the control risk low. Because you have tested the control, you have tested certain sample and you have not found any mistake. In that case of scenario, your conclusion on the control risk will be identified as a low, right? Make sense? If your control risk is low, then your sample for the test of detail will also be low, right? Make sense?
So is this an equivalent of detection risk?
No. When your control risk is low, then detection risk will go up.
No. So where we say risk of incorrect acceptance, now we're saying that the sample we picked up is absolutely okay, but the population, the balanced population has an error. So वो तो detection risk हो गया, एक तरह से.
Yeah, so we are studying detection risk only.
Sorry.
We are studying detection risk. Within that, like we are trying to understand when detection risk is relating to sampling or when it is not relating to sampling.
Okay, thank you.
Second point is in risk of incorrect rejection. So same way how you have first selected or first accepted the misstatement, same way you can incorrectly reject the population also. For example, you have tested 25 samples and out of which you found mistake in 5 samples. So your expectation is that 20% of the population is wrong. right? If you just do the math, then you are expecting that 20% of the population is wrong. As the 20% of the population is wrong, I cannot rely on control, right? Because it is less than 90%, right? You are not able to rely on control. So in that case of scenario, whereas rest of the population is okay, and it was unfortunate for the company, the sample you have selected for having major mistake, right? In that case of scenario, there is a chance that the sample verified is incorrect, but untested population is appropriate. That means you are incorrectly rejecting the right population and testing more sample in your test of detail. So the impact of the risk of assessing control risk is high. In that case of scenario, you will be assessing the control risk high. If you are assessing the control risk high, then you will be testing more sample, right? Required to perform additional audit procedure as well. So that make your audit inefficient as well sometimes. Make sense? Sampling risk and non-sampling risk.
Yes, sir, a question. So if I talk about risk of incorrect acceptance, right, this becomes more like an inherent thing that there is always a probability that my remaining population, there can be an error. There is no error in my untested population, or there is error in my untested population, right? So this is not in my control. If I'm selecting, let's say, sample of 25, the remaining population would always have that, and that's what detection risk is, right?
Yes, yes,
we are not able to detect that, right? But in the second one, it's more on that we are not able to perform it accurately, because this is not something that we're not able to identify. It is just that the sample we selected, we did not test it accurately, and that's why
sample we have tested properly, and unfortunately we got the more mistakes in the sample, and basis those mistakes we are rejecting to rely on the control of the entire population, and then we are end up doing more test of details.
However, the remaining populations were appropriate.
Sample testing for test of details. Yes.
Okay. Makes sense.
Right. Kashish, Gurmehar, Nimisha, all good?
So second वाला थोड़ा confusing लग रहा था.
Simple है, simple. It's very simple. First one is, in your sample, let's say from the 1000 population of purchases, for example, there is a company for which you are an auditor, right? They have made 1000 transactions for purchases during the year. So as an auditor, you cannot test 1000, right? So you are planning to test, let's say, 25 sample out of those 1000 transactions. In that 25 sample, we have noticed 5 are wrong. Okay. Right? So then your expectation is that if out of 25, 5 is wrong, that means 20% population is wrong.
Yes.
Right? 5 by 25 is 20%, right? So now your conclusion is that 20% of the population is wrong, whereas actually out of those 975, there is no other misstatement. That means you are incorrectly rejecting and you are not relying on control, right? And if you are not relying on controls, you are keeping control risk high. If the control risk is high, then you will be selecting more sample when you are testing the value. That is test of detail. Make sense?
Yes. Got it.
Yeah, Gurmehar.
Yes, sir. मैं थोड़ा ये I want to understand नीचे के दोनों में conclusion लिखे impact of risk of assessing the control risk is low and risk is too high. एक बार ये repeat कर दोगे?
Yes.
Not able to.
So yes, because this concept is very important, and you will definitely get one question at least in your exam from this concept. So assessing the risk, control risk too low. That means first one, just keep first one in mind. You have 1000 line item, out of which you selected 25, and in those 25 you have not noticed any mistake, right? Then what you will conclude, you will be relying on control, right? Yes or no?
Right.
So as you are relying on control, you are be considering control risk low.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
If the control risk is low and you are putting reliance on the control, then when you are planning test of details, you'll be selecting less samples.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And in other case, which we have discussed just before with the questions, the risk will be assessed as high and you'll be testing more in test of detail. So that make your audit inefficient.
Okay.
Right? Make sense?
Okay.
Okay, so here is the table actually. So what we were discussing so that you all can easily see how it actually look like. So first one is for test of details, right? First table is for test of detail and second table is for test of control. So first table, if you see audit evidence indicate, that means from 1000 transaction, you have tested 25 transactions, right? And those 25 transactions are good, are fairly stated, then you are accepting. If in actually the entire population in the client book is also correct, fairly stated, then the decision, the conclusion you have reached is also correct, because you have also accepted and in the client books is also fairly stated, then your conclusion is right. But if the situation is that in the client book it is not fairly stated, that means out of those 975 there are mistakes, but in 25 samples which you have selected there was no mistake, so then there is a risk of incorrect acceptance, right? Same way, other way, sorry, when you have selected 25 samples and you have noticed 5 or 6 are wrong, that means you are rejecting, your conclusion is not relying, you are rejecting, whereas the 975 are fairly stated, that means your risk is incorrect rejection, right? Those 975 plus 20 out of those 25 samples are correct, only the misstatement is in 5 out of 1000, which is less than 1%. That means you are rejecting incorrectly. If you have decided to reject the population and the population is also not fairly stated, in that case your decision is right. Make sense? Does this table helpful?
Yes, sir.
Right. So now look at the second table. First table is for test of detail. Second is for test of control. So in test of control, if you are accepting the control, that means if you are relying the control, the 25 sample you have selected is all right, and the client record is also right, then your decision is correct. But if the client records are not right, then there is a risk of incorrect acceptance and assessing the control risk too low. And if you have rejected the population based on the sample, whereas rest of the population is right, there is a risk of incorrect rejection and assessing the control risk too high. And if you have rejected and the population also have some mistakes, then your decision is correct. So this is like quick summary of point number 1 and 2, which we have discussed here, is a 2 type of sampling risk. Consideration for sampling of test of control. So far we discussed on sampling risk. Now we are jumping into the new topic, which is things you need to consider when you are selecting the sample for testing of control. First one is the relationship of sample to the objective of the test. Second is your tolerable error or threshold limit for testing of control. Third is auditor allowable risk of assessing the control risk to low. And the fourth one is characteristics of item comprising the account balance, class of transaction to be sample, that is your population. So you need to consider the population, tolerable error, risk, relationship, and characteristics, right? And to determine the number of items to be tested, to be selected for a particular sample of test of control, the auditor should consider the following: tolerable error, likely rate of deviation, and control risk. Right? Are you guys with me?
Yes, sir.
And samples should be selected in such a way that a sample can be expected to be a representative of the population. So that is the reason most of the time in testing of control, we use statistical sampling, because statistical sampling is generally represent the entire population. Whether you are using random sampling or you are using PSS, right? Both the techniques give you the sample from throughout the population or from the entire population. So that is the reason they are more representative of the entire population rather than just key item testing or testing the item based on the risk, right? Auditor may design a sample that will be used for dual purpose. So have you heard about this term before, dual purpose testing?
Yes, sir.
Any idea what is dual purpose testing?
So using the same sample for our test of controls and test of details.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So dual purpose testing is those sample which you can use for test of control while testing the attribute, and the same sample you can later on use for the test of detail for testing the value. Right? Whenever you are using dual purpose testing, in that case of scenario, your sample size would be larger than normal test of control. Right? The size of sample design for both purpose should be larger of sample that would otherwise have been designed for two separate population or for two separate testing, for two separate, not people population. Right. Auditor should evaluate the deviation from prescribed control and monetary misstatement separately. So here, if you found any mistakes in attribute, then it will go into the test of control. If you found any misstatement in value, then it will go for a test of detail usage. Right? Sampling in substantive test of detail. So far, we have discussed all things around test of control. Now we are discussing things about test of detail. What is the objective of test of detail? What is the objective of test the number
values, yeah.
which is coming in the financial statement, right? Testing the value. When planning sample for substantive test of detail, consider the following. First is the relationship. Relationship of sample to the relevant audit objective. Second is primary estimate of materiality level, which is your overall materiality, performance materiality, and tolerable error, right? Or you can mention here that is OM, EM, and T, right? Auditor allowable risk of incorrect acceptance. So which is like auditor risk you have identified, characteristics of population, and tolerable error. So these things you need to define for selecting the sample, and to determine the number of items to be selected in a sample for substantive test of detail, auditor should consider the following. First is auditor assessment of the risk of material misstatement. Whether you assess the risk of material misstatement low, moderate, high, fraud risk, right? Accordingly, your number of sample vary based on the risk of material misstatement. So this is very important. Before selecting the sample from any population, it is mandatory for the auditor to assess the risk, which we have learned in chapter 3 earlier. Risk of material misstatement we discussed in detail, right? Hope you remember in chapter 3, RMM.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes,
Key
sir.
point is assurance obtained from other substantive procedure directed at the same assertion. So anyone would like to explain the meaning of this? Assurance obtained from other substantive procedure for the same assertion. Any idea? What does it mean?
So for, let's say, for completeness of a particular financial statement line item,
Mhm.
if what other substantive procedures have we performed and how much comfort are we getting from there, would also define how, how we are doing the sampling for this particular procedure.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely right. For example, let's say for completeness, you have done the reconciliation from sub ledger to journal ledger to ensure the completeness of the population. And the same way, if your next test you are doing reconciling the number of the journal ledger balance with the financial statement line item, right? Like how many of you have done tick and tie of the financial statement with the trial balance or journal ledgers? Have you guys done any such things?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what we call in audit? Tick and tie or something else?
Yeah, I mean, so usually the first one you talked about was agreement of subledger to journal ledger. The second one is, I mean, tick and tie is generally what we call. I mean, that's what I remember.
Yeah. So general. Yeah. Sorry, Nimisha.
Tie-through procedures.
Say a bit loud.
Tie-through procedures.
Yeah. Tie up. What do you call tie up procedure? Tie through.
Tie-through procedures.
So in that case of scenario, when you're reconciling the item of your trial balance to the financial statement, so you already have some level of comfort that the trial balance number coming in trial balance is reconciled with the journal ledger and sub ledger, right? So you have already ensured one level of completeness check. So you have some level of comfort based on the other procedure you perform to ensure the completeness assertion, right? C is tolerable misstatement, that is your tolerable error amount. Expected misstatement of the population, 1%, 2%, 5%, that is completely professional judgment of the auditor, right? The next one is stratification of the population. What is stratification of the population? What is
Segregation,
yeah,
the segregating the population, let's say, due to the nature and characteristics.
Yes, based on nature and characteristics of the population. Like in the morning, we discussed example, rent expenditure, sales expenditure, marketing expenditure, general expenditure, right? Last one is sampling unit. What will be your sampling unit? Like it can be an invoice, it can be journal entry, it can be document number, it can be purchase order. So that you need to define what exactly is your sampling unit when you're planning to perform the test of material, right? Sample should be selected in such a way that the sample can be expected to be representative of the population. Right now, I made this small table for you. I'm sure this will be helpful in your last minute revision. So what are the factors basically influencing the sample size? So I have put this small table over here. So it will definitely help you in the last minute revision when you are doing revision for your exam purpose. What are the factors you need to keep in mind that may impact the sample size? Right. So if you see, the first one is factor, first column is factor. Second, when the sample size is low and when the sample size is more. And then fourth column, if you see, related factor for substantive sample planning. How do you plan for it? So if you see first column, it has been written all the factors. In second column, when the sample size will be low, and in third column when sample size will be high, and fourth column is the related factors for reaching out to those conclusions. If you see the first one, assessment of inherent risk. So what is the factor which may impact the sample size is the assessment of inherent risk. If you have assessed the inherent risk low, then your sample size will be low. If you have assessed the inherent risk high, then your sample size will be high, right? And how do you assess that inherent risk is based on allowable risk of incorrect acceptance. Like how much as a CPA, as an auditor, you are comfortable to accept the risk. Based on that, you will be assessing the risk high or low. Right? Make sense? First row clear to everyone? How this table looks like and objective of this table.
Yes, sir.
Second is control risk. Assessment of the control risk is also a major factor that impact number of sample size. Right? If the control risk is low, then number of sample will be low. Make sense? If the control risk is concluded as high, that means you are not relying on the control. So your test on detailed sample will be increased. This is also again based on the acceptance of the risk by the auditor. How much risk he or she is comfortable accepting. Third one is assessment of the risk for other substantive procedure related to the same assertion. Like for example, we have discussed about the completeness, right? So which is general ledger and sub-ledger reconciliation, right? And then you have sent the confirmation as well. For the balance confirmation for, let's say, receivable, bank balance, or maybe confirmation from the lawyer for litigation claim and assessment. That also give you the comfort over the completeness assertion, right? But in addition to that, you have already performed the reconciliation procedure for the completeness. So how much gain or how much comfort you have gained already from the existing procedure you have performed. Accordingly, you will be putting the risk on the other activities which you are planning to perform. If the risk assessed is low with the other relevant procedure which you have performed, then the overall number of sample you need to perform, you need to test will be low. For example, account receivable. For account receivable, the balance is being 100% reconciled from general ledger, sub-ledger to general ledger and to the balance sheet, right? In addition to that, when you have done the sales testing and collection testing, you have not found any mistake. So in that case of scenario, when you have tested the sales, you have not found any mistake. When you have tested the collection, you have not found any mistake. When you have done the reconciliation, you have not found any mistake. In that case of scenario, it will give you more comfort and you will select the less number of sample. Make sense? Yes, no? Are you guys with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
But whereas when you are testing the sales transaction, you have noticed certain mistake. When you have tested the cutoff procedure, you have noticed certain mistake. When you have done the reconciliation, it is not absolutely reconciling. In that case of scenario, you will be requesting more and more number of confirmation, right? Your sample size will be high. So this also based on the allowable risk acceptance of the auditor. D point, measure of tolerable misstatement of specific account. If your tolerable error is high, that means your value of identifying any misstatement as a misstatement is high, then your sample size will be low, right? If your tolerable error value is low, then it will automatically increase the number of sample, right? Make sense?
Yes, sir.
In the last column, it depends on tolerable error amount which you have finalized, right? Fifth is expected size and frequency of misstatement. If the frequency is low, then sample will be low. If the frequency is high, then sample would be more. Assessment of the population characteristics is the consideration. Number of item in the population. So if like number of transaction is very low, then it will impact the number of sample. Otherwise, it will not majorly impact on the number of sample size. And choice between statistical and non-statistical sample size are comparable. So both, it depends on professional judgment of the auditor, where you feel is good approach or more effective approach to conduct the respective audit. But generally, sample size are comparable in both the approach, right? So this summary will help you when you are preparing for the exam. And once you do some you can say sample Q&A, I'm sure, and come back to this table. It will help you in reconnecting the dots, which you might be missing when you are doing some practice question. Right? Any doubt here? Ready for some samples, some examples, some practice questions? Are you guys with me?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, so what is the first question? The degree of audit risk always represent in an audit engagement is known as combination of non-sampling and sampling risk. An example of non-sampling risk is what? Which one is out of these four options is a non-sampling risk? The internal controls not being as effective as the auditor believe. Internal control being more effective than the auditor believe. The auditor selecting inappropriate audit procedure. The auditor conclude the balance is not materially misstated, but is in fact materially misstated. Which one is an example of non-sampling risk?
Sir, unrecognized error. So basically, this is the
Sorry?
fourth point. So this is the fourth point is correct because it's unrecognized error.
The auditor concluding the account balance is not materially misstated, but is in fact materially misstated. So is it a sampling error or non-sampling error?
It's a non-sampling error.
Are you sure?
Yes, at the right side, it's unrecognized error.
How about others?
Basically, failure to recognize error, or maybe failure to evaluate findings and sample properly. So it's non-sampling.
So non-sampling risk include all aspects of audit risk that are not due to sampling, failure to properly define the population, failure to clearly define the nature of audit, failure to recognize error, failure to evaluate finding in a sample properly. So what is the reason to conclude this as a non-sampling? Failure to are you guys with me?
Recognize the error, I guess.
Yeah, Rahul, Kashish, Garvit, are you all good with fourth?
सर तीनों पॉइंट्स तो उसमें है ही नहीं, इंक्लूड ही नहीं नॉन सैम्पलिंग रिस्क में, तो सर फोर्थ ही बचा तो वही होगा आई गेस.
Yeah, that's the easiest way. Cool. Anyone else need more clarification? We are good with point
So,
number 4.
Kamal, just one thing here. So, the first or second point here, do they get covered into the sampling risk
Yes.
section where we say, but wahan pe the only reason I'm confused is wahan pe we said that the sample could be correct and then the population is wrong and vice versa. So, how does that fit in here? So, that's why uska conclusion निकल रहा है या क्या निकल रहा है, मतलब मैं यहाँ थोड़ा सा कंफ्यूज हो रही हूँ.
Sorry, say that again.
So is this line, let's just say हम लोग सिर्फ first option consider करते हैं, internal control not being as effective as the auditor believes, which means let's say we picked up a sample, 100% वो correct है, but since that sample is not a like, since that sample is okay, हम लोगों ने conclude कर दिया everything is okay, but the rest of the population is not okay. Is
Here,
that what
because
we're trying to
this conclusion is like after testing, and that is before.
And then Kamal, this question is on non-sampling risk, right? That is part of sampling risk.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to understand is what basis do we rule out the first three options on?
Because like internal control not being as effective as the auditor believe. So what auditor believe?
Is the first option a beta risk and second is alpha risk?
Alpha risk, yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So basically, alter believe meaning that the sample size is correct. So we believe that everything is fine.
Yes.
In second option, alter believe is that the sample were not correct. So we stated that we believe that the entire population is not correct, which is not the case.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So Nimisha, if you see this first one, risk of incorrect accept. Sounds good?
Yeah, it's okay. Understood. Thank you.
Okay, so second question, what is the likelihood of assessing control risk too high in case of sample selected to test the control? So when you assess control risk too high, does not support the auditor plan assessed level of control risk when the true operating effectiveness of internal control justifies such assessment, does not support the tolerable error for some or all the management assertion, contain misstatement that could be material to financial statement when aggregate with misstatement in other account balances or transaction classes, contain proportionately fewer monetary errors or deviation from prescribed internal control structure, policies or procedure than exist in the balance or class of transaction. Which one is resulting into assessing the control risk too high and why? When do you assess control risk too high? When do you assess control risk too high? When you have sample in which there is a problem, whereas in actual population there is no problem, right? Are you guys with me? Yeah, Kashish?
Yes, sir, yes, sir. So that is the first part, now risk of incorrect acceptance.
Yes. So if you go back here, yeah, if you see the risk of incorrect rejection and assessing the control risk too high. So this is the scenario. Or if you see the risk of incorrect rejection, that's an alpha risk. There's a chance that the sample verified is incorrect, but untested population is appropriate. So which will be the right answer? What happened?
So first you.
Why? Gurmehar, Nimisha, Bush, Rahul, Jaspreet.
My second or fourth option to directly rule out हो रहा है.
Yes, because that is
fourth option में तो हाँ वो second option तो is talking about tolerable error that is not applicable to controls. और ये जो last option है fewer monetary errors or deviations ये इसके साथ fit नहीं होता with the question. Third option थोड़ा मतलब I'm just trying to figure out what is it exactly trying to tell me in relation.
Third option says contain misstatement that could be material to financial statement when aggregate with misstatement in other account balance or transaction. So that is, like you have noticed certain misstatement, and if you are aggregating with other misstatement, then overall misstatement will be material to the financial statement. That is what third means.
So इसमें control risk assessment तो आया ही नहीं ना. This has to see gotten to the level of misstatements already.
Yeah. Push Gurmehar. Sanchit, Jasprit. Are you guys here or are you gone for the lunch break?
Sir, yeah.
Yes, sir, we are here. We are here.
We are here.
So why you guys are not responding? Have you understood like question? Have you understood the question?
Yes, sir.
So what is the call of the question? Assessing the control risk too high. Likelihood of assessing the control risk too high. So this is the call of the question. When do you assess the control risk too high?
So when we don't rely on controls?
Yes, when you are not planning to rely on control. When you will not plan to rely on control?
So
Like
when
when
there
there
are exceptions or deficiencies noted while you are testing. When there are exceptions in your sample testing.
Yeah. So just keep those things in mind and see which one out of these four would be the best answer. You know, sometime you may see 2 right answer or 3 right answer. In that case of scenario, you need to select the best right answer for the situation, right? There might be other scenario where you will see like none of the answer is much relevant. So you need to select the most relevant answer. So that's also a trick for the exam or tips for the exam. Which one looks like not relevant for this question? First, let's throw them out. Out of these four, which one you feel is not relevant for this question?
The second one, sir.
Why?
So because now talking about the tolerable error for some of the management assertions.
So it's talking about value, not the attribute, right?
Right.
So we are when we are testing the control, we are testing attribute, not the value. So the second one is ruled out. What about third one?
So that's also the value only because it's talking about the misstatement and the financial statement.
Right. What is fourth one?
So proportionate fewer monetary errors को समझ नहीं आता थोड़ा सा मतलब ये भी मतलब कि वैल्यू की मतलब monetary errors हो रहे हैं.
Yeah, monetary error is value, right?
Value only. Okay.
If you see the first one does not support the auditor planned assessed level of control risk when the true operating effectiveness of internal control justify such statement. So only the first one is giving you the factors required to be considered for control risk assessment. Rest of them are more relating to test of details. Right? Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Third question. What is the advantage of statistical sampling over non-statistical sampling? So we discuss about the benefit of statistical sampling, right? So it is from there only. Reduce the level of audit risk and materiality to a relatively low amount. Measure the sufficiency of the audit evidence obtained. Eliminate the risk of non-sampling error. Minimize the failure to detect the error and fraud. Does any sampling technique reduce the level of audit risk?
No, sir.
No, sir.
First one is eliminated.
No,
Yes, sir.
See, does
Third
any,
one is incorrect.
yeah, yes, absolutely. Does any sampling technique minimize the failure to detect
No,
error?
sir.
The answer is no. So fourth is eliminated.
Yes, sir.
So you need to choose
Only
between
second
2
option.
and 3. Huh?
Sir, third one is incorrect because it says eliminate the risk of non-sampling units. It won't eliminate.
Non-sampling तो होगा ही नहीं क्योंकि जब sample लिया है
Non-sampling
तो
risk will always exist.
Hmm.
right? So the right answer is third,
Option 2.
right?
Option 2.
Yeah, option 2, sorry. So do you remember like advantage of statistical sampling, which we have discussed in our last week class? Benefit of statistical sampling: design the effective sample, measure the sufficiency of audit evidence. So this is what they were saying, right?
Yes, sir.
So we are good with sampling.
काफी हद तक, sir.
I know this is confusing sometimes.
Yes, sir.